Dr. Andrea Schnowske from Freedom Chiropractic and Holistic Health in the Peoria Metro Center and our YouTube channel, Health and Horsepower. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about stress and hormones, and then the rest of this month I'm going to go kind of dive down deep into a couple hot topics, things like stress and how that affects your mood and can affect things like anxiety, depression, irritability, and feelings of overwhelm. I also want to talk a little bit more about libido and fatigue and energy and some other things too. So this week I want to kind of give you an overview. You may have heard me talk about HPA axis disorders previously. So when we're looking at HPA axis, this is hypothalamus. That is going to be the part of your brain that helps you dealing with everything from mood as well as how you're interacting with your environment. So typically we can see issues where if hypothalamus isn't working properly, we can be very irritable or short and kind of quick to fuse and quick to get in arguments or quick to get upset about things. I've also seen some issues with anxiety and depression when this hypothalamus isn't working properly. And then we also have pituitary gland. That's going to be more related specifically to not only thyroid function, but sexual hormones. We can see growth, we can see repair, we can see a lot of other things underneath that. But pituitary is going to be how your body is able to repair itself and interact. Like I mentioned, thyroid, sex hormones, a lot of those things are linked with that. And then adrenal is going to be more of your stress response. So when our body is under stress, it has to conserve and redirect resources. It has to stop certain body functions so that our body can deal with the stress of whatever's happening in our life at that time. So when we look at HPA axis disorders, typically what I see is that the adrenal gland tends to kind of steal from the hypothalamus and pituitary so it can stay functioning. Adrenal gland is what I like to call the queen or the king gland if you're a male. That way it kind of helps us to break down and understand a little bit more about how that specific system directs the functions underneath it. So when we look at the adrenal gland, like I mentioned, your adrenal gland is your queen or your king gland, depending on if you're a male or a female. Your adrenal gland has to function for you to survive. This is your fight or flight response. This is how your body is going to handle any stressor your body throws at you. Now, this gland produces two main hormones. One is called cortisol, and the other is called DHEA. Now, cortisol normally, like if we were to look at a graph of your cortisol level throughout the day, in the morning our cortisol should be relatively high. By noon, that value should be half, and then it should be low in the evening and before bed. So ideally, we want to see that graph kind of going down like this. Now, if we're under unnecessary stress, say, first thing in the morning, you get up, you're stressed to the extreme, your body's dealing with the stressors, and you're doing just fine, you might be a little higher than normal. And that's what I like to call adrenal stress. When your gland is working properly, but it's under some additional stress, and we may see where our levels are a bit higher than they're supposed to be because your body is handling that, running 100 miles an hour, doing all the things, being super mom or super dad to get things done. A lot of times what can happen is after we have that time of stress, our body almost kind of crashes afterwards. We've been doing it for so long, we know we can run 100 miles an hour, but eventually gets to the point where it's like, okay, I did it, but I need to sit down for a minute. I need to rest. I need to relax. I need to kind of gather my thoughts before I go on the rest of the day. Typically, when we have more of that crash or that need for rest or that need for space, I typically call that more of like an adrenal fatigue, where basically after the stress, your body needs time to recover and kind of come back from that, or needs time to kind of redirect resources. If we're under chronic stress for a long period of time, and we actually get to the point where the adrenal gland starts to get damaged, we'll see more and more of the fatigue symptoms come up, and that can start affecting other body areas. The other thing to understand is when we have this going on for a long period of time, eventually when you cause damage to the gland, we can see where it starts to flatline, and then you really don't have cortisol going up or down. It may still be in range, like if you did your blood levels in the morning, it's still in normal range, but it's not really doing anything. It's just kind of staying flatline for the day. A lot of times when it comes to blood testing for cortisol, you're not really going to get a good idea unless you're getting multiple samples in the same day to really understand what's happening for you. Another thing too is cortisol levels are also affected when you have caffeine, and they're also affected when you have alcohol. and certain medications. So sometimes if you're on medications, that can also cause symptoms of this. If you're drinking a lot of caffeine, that can also cause symptoms of this. If you're drinking a lot of alcohol or your body can't handle alcohol, you can also have symptoms of this. So when we look at the adrenal gland, cortisol is a big one that kind of gives us an idea about where your body's at. But the other thing too is when we look at DHEA. DHEA is a precursor hormone. This actually helps kind of with your get up and go for the day. This also can convert down into testosterone and eventually estrogen and some other pathways. So a lot of times what I find is when the adrenal gland is stressed and it's, needing to conserve resources, we may start to see some of our energy start to drain, where your body's going to start changing energy resources and kind of converting those more. So in addition to some energy changes, we can see fatigue, whether it's after stress or just randomly throughout the day or all the time. We can also see our sleep patterns change. So we may notice we're not sleeping as well. We may notice waking up, we're not feeling rested. We may notice that even with the CPAP, we're still not quite getting the sleep we need and feeling rested when we wake up. Another thing that's affected is our immune function. So sometimes we'll notice that we're getting sick more often. It takes longer to heal or recover from an injury or a sickness. I've also seen in some cases autoimmune conditions can also be a big factor. Whereas if your adrenal gland's not working properly, it'll make autoimmune conditions much more kind of roller coaster ride, where you're going to have more issues with flares and things like that. The other thing to understand is we're going to have our sex and our mood hormones underneath here. So if we're having issues with libido, if we're having issues with feeling or, being able to seek out or being able to enjoy those episodes, that may be an indicator that your sex hormones could be off, affecting sexual function or potentially even fertility issues. Mood hormones are another one that's affected. So if you are typically very short to anger, you get overwhelmed easily. I know I mentioned anxiety and depression are another big one, but if you feel like even with medication things aren't working properly or you're not getting the results, we may need to look a little bit more as to what's going on with the system. Another thing that is underneath here is digestion. So when your digestive system is off and not working properly, that's going to not only cause issues with things like heartburn and reflux and stomach pain, but it can actually cause issues where you're not breaking down your food properly, which means you're going to be missing nutrition. And when you're missing nutrition, your body's going to start changing metabolism. So a lot of times we will see when digestive systems aren't working properly that we may not want to eat because it's painful and we're not eating the right foods because it hurts. We're eating very few things because it's just a pain in the butt to try to eat anything that doesn't upset you. You might have, stomach issues, you might have intestinal issues, you might be in the bathroom a lot. But the other thing too is even if you're not eating much, your body's inflamed. So a lot of times we'll still see bloating. We'll still see that we are a little bit bigger, overweight from where we want to be. And our metabolism can actually cause us to start putting on more fat storage rather than maintaining our muscle mass. So your body will actually break down muscle to give you blood sugar since you're not taking it in. So a lot of times when we have digestive issues and we're not eating right, that can actually work against us, lowering our metabolism, causing weight gain, causing bloating, and causing a lot of other issues. So there's so many different systems that can be affected. Like I said, this month, my plan is to go through some of these really important ones and kind of break and dive into those a bit more. So hopefully you learned something today. I know in my office, we typically do lab testing and talk a little bit more about what's going on so we know where we need to start for you specifically when we're looking at health issues. Have a great rest of your day.